summer. Finally! Holidays, vacations, beaches, and even finding out that your dad is responsible for creating hell on earth. What? Wait. For God's sake, there is no shot in hell that I can show that in the intro and then not address it immediately. Sorry. Hi, I'm Ristel. Welcome back to the channel. You're watching episode 4 of my P3R review series. As you may have guessed from the introduction, we actually have a lot to talk about story-wise this time around. Now let's just follow the format of the third episode and I will immediately give you my impression of this arc. I will say that it is pretty solid, we get a lot of revelations, but I wasn't too satisfied until the summer classes happened. Turns out that there's something in the summer classes that is revealed to the player that actually had me going all the way to the Kabbalah Center in Berlin to get a better idea of what the game was trying to convey to me. Yeah, that big of a deal, huh? But before I can get to share what I learned from my trip to the Kabbalah Center, we're gonna have to talk about the main story as well as Cease and new gameplay mechanics that have been introduced throughout this arc. And only once we're through all of these will we talk about the theory aspect of this video. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Despite the beautiful scenery, I think everybody could have expected that there would be a huge lore reveal at this point of the game. We already knew that Mitsuru's dad would show up and that he would actually host us. I made mention of that in my third episode. However, the amount of stuff that was packed into this short trip to the beach was actually quite surprising to me. We've already seen the scene where Yukari finds out that her dad was actually responsible for creating Tartarus. He was one of the scientists that worked for the Kirijo group. It is also revealed that the Kirijo group was trying to create a machine to turn back time. I think it's interesting that they wanted to create a time machine of sorts. If you think about it, the idea of time is present throughout the entire game thus far. I mean, the Dark Hour is a good example of that, but also if you think about it, the clock within Tartarus. Both the clock that allow you to restore SP and HP for your entire team, as well as the clock room that allows you to level up party members that are a bit behind Makoto's level. This puts Yukari in a pretty difficult situation. If you recall, Yukari was actually looking up to her father and trying to figure out what actually had happened to him. Finding out that he is actually responsible for the damage and for having created Tartarus is very disheartening to her, obviously. This is when she starts to open up to Makoto, and later on you will finally have access to her confidant. More on that later though, because I do have some complaints about it. As if this trip wasn't already packed full with lore, we also get to meet a very special someone on the beach. While the guys and Makoto himself actually try and do a Operation Babe Hunt, quote unquote, aka try and pick up a girl on the beach and fail miserably, they encounter someone that is quite special and someone that only seems to respond to Makoto. She runs away into the forest and Makoto chases after her. While this is happening, the girls that did not join the beach party, I wonder why, get a call from the chairman who tell them that a weapon went missing from the lab. Obviously, if you've played this game or if you've seen any kind of content related to this game, you know who I'm talking about. It's Aigis. And no, it's not Aegis. I pronounced it like that for a while, but it's actually Aigis. Upon tracking Aigis down in the forest, she says that she recognizes Makoto and she tries and hug him. It's a bit awkward because everybody just happens to converge at the tree at the same moment, and while the girls are kind of freaked out because they think that there's a mission to be done, the chairman comes in and reassures everybody that actually the weapon that they're looking for is right in front of them. This leads to Aigis joining the team officially. We'll get back to this in a little bit, but I do have my share of issues with this. Mainly that Aigis just joins the team like that, like on a whim. It is very reminiscent of how Junpei was introduced in the very beginning of the game. He literally just shows up at the dorm one night and everything happens off screen. And I thought that the game had kind of gotten past that at this point. Back in episode 2, I really praised the game for its integration of Fuka to the team and to the party. It made sense and she was given a lot of context prior to joining. And now we're back to just throwing in new members like that. I think that's kind of a shame. Not only that, but my expectations for Aigis were completely out of whack. If you look at the opening of the game, you can see her within Tartarus, missing an arm. Since we still lacked information as to what kind of experiments were conducted by the Kirijo group, my thought was that Aigis was perhaps an attempt at resurrecting someone. For some reason, someone died, someone very important and very dear to the Kirijo family. Grandpa goes crazy, tries to put the soul of that person within an AI robot, and everything just blows up in his face. So I really expected her to show up within Tartarus, that we'd find her in Tartarus, kind of like how we found Fuka, and perhaps we'd find her in a broken down state and we need to repair her. So that introduction fell short of my expectations. Although I do have to say that at the very least it's handled in front of the camera. The player is able to witness her introduction, so I think that's a plus. Also, a little side note here, but no one even questions the fact that she's an AI robot that is sentient. I found that to be so weird that I actually consulted one of my friends over it, and he said that Cease has witnessed so much insane stuff ever since they joined the group that perhaps this doesn't really faze them anymore, which I guess is a fair enough argument. Either way, we go back to the dorms with Aigis amongst our ranks, and then we get a set of cutscenes that involve Shinji. Shinji seems to be entertaining some kind of special relation with the villains. In fact, they are giving him drugs, and he seems to be in great pain. Now, what the drugs are exactly and what they're for is not explained, but we can come up with a few theories. It's possible that he has some kind of chronic condition, the kind of condition that would require him to use painkillers. It is also possible that the drugs in question are illicit, and that his pain is actually induced by withdrawals. But I have a third theory, and it's a wild guess, so bear with me for a minute. What if those drugs are antidepressants? I've previously theorized that the people who are capable of witnessing the Dark Hour are all traumatized in some way. Knowing that Shinji is an orphan, he already probably has some kind of trauma himself. We also already know that he's very much against the idea of joining Cease again. We also find out throughout this cutscene that he quit last year due to an accident. So perhaps if there is a way to deal with that trauma, to numb the pain associated with it, could that imply losing the ability of witnessing the Dark Hour altogether? Antidepressants come in many forms. Nowadays, the most commonly known form of antidepressant is SSRIs, though there exist other forms such as SNRIs, tetracyclic, tricyclic, just to name a few, all of which are prone to cause withdrawal effects when stopped cold turkey, aka when a person stops taking the medication abruptly. As I said before, this is a bit of a stretch, and I don't have much evidence to back that theory up just yet. Just food for thought. It is through these cutscenes that the villains will also reveal their motive. They do not want Tartarus to fall, or as they call it, the Tower of Demise, therefore making it clear that they stand against us, which happens to be exactly what they do. Fast forward to the 6th of August. A new full moon shines bright upon the town, which you should know by now means that we are about to have our boss fight. This time, it is set underground. Apparently, there are some army facilities left over from the war, all of them buried beneath the city. When we head there, we encounter two of the villains. They identify themselves as Strega. We finally get to know the name of their boss, Takaya, as well as his sidekick, Jin. Takaya will waste absolutely no time to question our motives. In doing so, he asked a pretty pointed question at us.
Do you really want to lose your abilities? Surely you will acknowledge the sense of fulfillment the Dark Hour has given you. Do you also wish to return to your pathetic ordinary lives?
That question seems to actually work on some of the members. Junpei is an obvious pick. We already know that he already questions what will happen to him after Tartarus ceases to exist. But more surprisingly, it seems that this also gets under Akihiko's skin. Either way, they decide to lock us into the bunker and we have no choice but to proceed and fight the shadow. About the fight itself and the environment it is set in, I thought that the fight was kind of cool. It is your usual gimmick of a boss that splits into two halves and then you have to kill both halves at the same time, otherwise they regenerate. However, the bunker itself is quite a boring location. It is a step down from the Love Hotel boss that we had from the last episode. This one is just a straight corridor that you walk through. Although you do get the chance to loot some Twilight fragments here and there, so that's a plus. Upon defeating the boss, Mitsuru will contact the chairman and she will tell him about Striga as well as the status of the mission. He says that he will dispatch someone to open the door for us, and that's about that. Everything would be fine and dandy if it wasn't for Pharos and what he has to tell us on the following day.
The end won't be brought about by any one person in particular. It's going to happen because there are many who wish for it.
Now this would already be a pretty damning revelation on its own, but it is followed up by a pretty worrisome discovery.
Soon, the flowers of poison will bloom, 3 in the rival garden and 1 in your own.
While it may be easy to discard what Pharos has to say on the basis that he has been quite unreliable throughout the game, he remains pretty elusive, and my only theory is that it is Makoto's inner child speaking to him. His warning is actually supported by someone else in the game, the fortune teller. In Persona games, fortune tellers are usually seen as trustworthy. In fact, whenever we ask her to read our fortune and then go into Tartarus, the effects do actually happen, so we can kind of confirm that she is capable at her job. And her saying the same thing as Pharos did is no coincidence. If we try and read between the lines, it seems to imply that someone within SEAS is likely going to betray us. There are prime candidates for members of SEAS that could turn against us. I've mentioned Junpei and Akihiko, but no definitive proof so far. And so for now, our only choice is to move on. Soon after that, we end up recruiting a new member to SEAS, Koromaru, the dog. I won't talk much about his introduction because it is very short and there's not much to be said about it. We'll talk more about his role as a member as the SEAS and gameplay section come up. For now, we are forced to go through summer classes, and this is when I had an elimination of sorts. We'll come back to that in the theory section because it is a big deal and I want to have as much time as possible to discuss it. However, something odd occurs right after the summer classes end. You see, on August 14th, we end up running into Takaya alone, except this time we fight alongside him. While he seems to be concealing the true power of his persona, he still helps us in dealing with the shadow that's threatening the bridge. And that scene has put everything back into question in my head. I cannot explain this right now. I do not have enough information. You can see him using a gun. He could have easily shot Makoto if he was really feeling threatened by him. Instead, he collaborated with us. And with that, we've covered basically everything that happens in the main story since episode 3. So I suggest that we move on and talk about members of SEAS now. Now, SEAS throughout this arc actually gets a lot of the spotlight during the main plot. However, there are still a few things that remain for me to talk about. First of all, being able to actually initiate the social link with Yukari means that you finally have the trifecta. In an ideal world, you should be able to actually talk to Yukari, Fuka, and Mitsuru at this time. The only issue with that though is that all of them actually require you to have max social stats for you to actually engage into the social link. Mitsuru will be intelligence, so that's the academics. Yukari will be charm, and Fuka will be courage. I don't know how to feel about that because honestly, getting to level 6 in all of these social stats takes a long time. It also feels as though the game is kind of rigged against you when it comes to academics. Like every other stat does level up quite frequently, but academics is always the one stat that seems to lag behind no matter what you do. And it is kind of weird that you don't really get to interact with your team members that much outside of the hangouts that you can do at the dorm. However though, there is one mechanic that I had briefly touched upon in episode 2 and not realized the implications of. These are called linked events, and I actually showed one of them happening in episode 2 with Akihiko. There's also another one that happened off screen with Junpei. However, what I had failed to realize is that those events are time sensitive. Junpei's events are a bit more lenient when it comes to time, but Akihiko's is super strict. You can only complete them at a very specific time. And the worst part about it is that if you are to miss even one of these events, every subsequent event in the list for that character becomes unavailable to you. These eventually will allow you to fuse certain personas, so these are actually quite important to do. Now, hey, you might say, well, that's not much of a big deal, you just have to know when these events occur. Well, here's the issue with that, and it kind of goes back to what I said in episode 2. Makoto's cell phone is getting spammed constantly with ads for the different stores in town. Whether it's the pharmacy telling you that they have a sale, or the ramen shop telling you that they have a new plate today, and on top of that, the different social links that try and reach out to you to hang out, you are constantly being bombarded with notifications on your phone. Not only that, but the phone and the icon for new notifications is tucked around in the left corner of the screen. It's also tinted very blue, and that makes it quite difficult to notice, especially on a bigger screen. Now I know I said it was a skill issue in episode 2, but actually this time this is quite problematic. Because the only way for you to know that one of these linked events is happening on that date would be to either see it on the map, check the network to see what other players did that day, or notice it on your phone. Now, I wouldn't have an issue with that on its own if it hadn't been for the fact that those events are quite important. There are many scenes in this game where Makoto will pull out his phone and get a notification, and you are forced to witness it on your phone. I don't understand why it is not the case here as well, considering how important these little events seem to be, and how missing a single one can actually compromise the rest of your playthrough. Now, call me crazy if you want, but I think that this is such an important notification that the player should be notified of it immediately. But not only do these events actually give you some gameplay advantages, they're also a nice window into the different characters and into their personalities, which again, I say that in correlation with the female members that actually get their own social links. It is kind of a shame that the only moments we really get to spend with these characters and learn more about them are from either timed events or locked behind high social stats that you are unlikely to have at this point of the game. Now, on the matter of the team's lineup, I was quite surprised actually. If you remember the end of episode 3, you would know that Ken was already quite foreshadowed to be the next member. So having 2 new members just join out of nowhere is quite surprising to me, especially considering the fact that Ken is still living in the dorms at this time. So I'm guessing that he's about to get a big awakening quite soon. Either way, I kind of like Koromaru as a new teammate. I guess it's a nice change of pace. Him joining the dorms also unlocks a new type of hangout where you actually go and walk him. This allows you to run into some of your social links and actually gain some points to the next rank. I'm not sure whether the characters that show up are randomized or if this works off a schedule that is not shown to the player, but that makes Koromaru's hangout quite unique because it doesn't reward you with items or social stats. Now, with such an extended roster, you may think that we actually have a lot more synergy going on in combat, and you would be exactly right to believe that. So let's move on and talk about gameplay now. With new party members come new 3G abilities. In this case, 2 of them. Nope, got you there. It's actually 3 new abilities for us to use. How come? Well, I don't know, and the game doesn't know either, so whatever. Just so happens that Koromaru gets 2 abilities for some reason. 2 very distinct abilities, may I add. Let's start with Aigis though, because her ability is quite interesting also. When Aigis uses 3G, she basically locks herself into rage. You know that shitty move from Pokemon, you know, the one that like locks you into just using the same move over and over again and doesn't let you do anything for a couple turns? Yeah, that's pretty much what she does. During which she will use all of her physical abilities for a couple turns until she finally overheats. It makes for a quite powerful 3G ability, but one with a drawback. Because all of the 3G abilities that we've seen thus far don't actually come with a drawback of any kind. They are very safe abilities to use. Aigis herself has a kit that is oriented towards physical damage and physical attacks. Her kit also includes a couple support spells such as buffs and debuffs, which while being useful are probably not why you're using Aigis as part of your team. You're mainly picking her because she has access to the entire arsenal of physical abilities, which turns out that actually pairs quite well with Koromaru's second 3rd ability. We'll talk about the first one right after, but the second one is the most interesting of the two. Upon being used, it actually gives the entire party a charge. By charge, I mean the one spell in Persona games that boosts the next physical attack that you will do to an enemy target. It is around this time that Makoto is able to get personas that have that skill innately, but having it as a party-wide buff is quite strong. And as I said, it actually has great synergy with other party members. Aigis herself is a pure physical attacker, but we also have Junpei and perhaps Akihiko that also fit the bill. And an extra charge on Makoto is never going to hurt ya because, well, you are always going to have a persona that has physical abilities in this game. His other 3G is a bit more basic. It is more like the other abilities that we've seen thus far. It deals dark damage and it is quite a powerful ability, although it is quite difficult to charge up, though perhaps still easier than Akihiko's. This one requires you to hit enemy weaknesses, but Koromaru only gets access to dark and fire skills, technically also slash skills, but there aren't that many enemies weak to slashes at this point of the game. Now the game is quite generous with you the first time you go to Tartarus with Koromaru. The first few floors that you explore are actually filled with enemies that are weak to either dark or fire, but I get the feeling that this won't last very long in the later levels of the tower. And perhaps that is a way of balancing that 3G ability. If I have to put it back into context and compare it to Persona 5 for example, I was able to get a mass concentrate spell from the jazz club on An by the 3rd semester. Yeah, that will take you a while before you get there. So getting that for free without having to worry about SP, yeah, that's quite a strong ability, and perhaps it needed some kind of drawback or just hindrance to not be overpowered. Now, besides the new mechanics that came with the new party members, I also discovered something quite neat from that one guy that sells you sketchy URLs, and it's called Ambush. Now, whenever Makoto runs into a straight path for a set amount of time, not only will he run faster, but he is also able to strike enemies from the front and still trigger the cease advantage. And on top of that, if you are able to strike an enemy from the back while this ambush state is active, the enemies are going to be afflicted with ailments at the start of the battle. A bit reminiscent of Yoshizawa's confidence skill, I think that was level 4 in Persona 5 Royale. Either way, that actually completely negates any complaint I had with the layout of Tartarus until now. Now you are pretty much guaranteed to always get the first strike on enemies. It also comes at the perfect time because the floors of Tartarus have expanded and become quite large to navigate. So being able to run a little bit faster and worry a bit less about taking cover is a really nice touch. And I will say that you kind of need any advantage that you can get at this point. And I kid you not when I say that this may be the first time I exited Tartarus with my SP completely drained. Thankfully, however, I was able to reach the next monad passage, and the reward I got from it actually was quite interesting to look at. See, there is one mechanic that is introduced from the very start of the game that I actually have not mentioned at all in my episodes. And I think that now with this reward from this specific monad door, we can actually have a conversation about it. You probably have guessed what it is. I'm talking about shuffle time. If you haven't played P3 yourself, you may have noticed something strange anytime I want to battle. It seems as though I'm not gaining any money, and you would have a keen eye because you're actually right. Basically, if you beat an encounter by doing an all-out attack, you get a guaranteed shuffle time. It can also appear without doing an all-out attack, but that's completely random. The way it works is that you are presented with a set of cards, of which you may choose one of them. Each of these cards give you different kinds of benefits. For example, one card may actually heal you or your entire party to full HP. Another card will gain bonus XP for the encounter. character, some of the cards will allow you to gain a new persona, and there's one card specifically that allows you to earn money. And I will stress that again, but these cards drop in a completely randomized fashion. You get to choose which card you end up picking, but you have no guarantee that the card that you want will actually show up in shuffle time. This can also be quite annoying because you only get to pick one card. So let's say that you want money, but there is a nice skill card that you can take. Well, you have to give up the money for that. Or the opposite scenario. Let's say that there's a nice persona that drops, but you also really need the healing. Well, too bad for you, buddy. Fun fact, if you happen to pick the persona card while being overstock, meaning that you cannot carry any more personas, and you don't have any personas that you want to discard, well, you just wasted your shuffle time. Yep, of course that has never happened to me, ever, in gameplay. Let's move on. Now those are minor Arcana cards that may drop, but there are also major cards that can appear. These only appear once during a run of Tartarus, and they have quite interesting effects. I've put them on the screen right there so you can see the different effects of the cards that I've unlocked thus far in gameplay. Most of the cards will be unlocked by beating bosses, but also by beating the monad passages. You are limited in the amount of cards that you can actually pick throughout a night. All of them may appear during shuffle time, but there is a limit to how many of these cards you can acquire throughout an entire journey. So you will have to pick and choose which card you think is best for what you're doing and planning to do within Tartarus that night. There is a way of increasing the amount of cards that you can pick throughout a single night. These are keys that you can find within the monad passages as rewards. You are also typically granted a new major Arcana card at the end of a monad passage. Now, the reason why I bring up this mechanic so late into my series is because of the card I obtained by beating the last boss, specifically Justice. Justice is quite interesting because it allows you to pick 2 cards at once during shuffle time, and that is a lifesaver. Once you discover it, once you know that it exists, it will change the way that you play the game entirely. Shuffle time as a whole is quite an interesting mechanic. My issue with it stems from the fact that there is no way of getting money within Tartarus beside actually getting the coins card every time you hit a shuffle time, and that's if you're lucky enough for it to actually appear. And you want to be making a lot of money while still being in Tartarus because that's the optimal time to fuse personas. Unfortunately for you, I would say that Elizabeth and Igor are running some kind of Ponzi scam in this game. Like seriously, even the most basic persona will cost you about 20k, and picking the coins card is likely going to give you about 2k or 3k if you're very lucky. So while Justice doesn't actually fix that issue entirely, it does allow you to pick coins and something else if you see something that is appealing to you. And oh my god, is that a breath of fresh air, honestly. Absolutely love this card. I think it is good for us to talk about shuffle time right now because the amount of major Arcana cards and their specific effects is going to increase as I beat more bosses and get through the game. We already have a pretty sizable chunk of cards to discuss right now, so if I come across a new card later on that is quite interesting, it would be a lot easier to talk about it with that mechanic already having been discussed in this episode at this time. And with that said, I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk about in this section, which means it's finally time for the theory. A game theory! Okay, I may have gotten a little bit too carried away here, but oh boy, trust me, this segment is insane. So, summer classes. What's so exciting about lectures, you might ask? First of all, the way you experience these classes is actually reminiscent of how exam periods would go in a Persona game. You start the week, lose control of your character, and the game pushes you through each day until you reach the end of that period. The game does exactly that for the entirety of the summer classes. But it handpicked 2 specific lessons for us players to actually witness in full. That I already think is a bit suspicious. Now, whenever I play Persona games, I tend to simply read the courses very quickly and then move on without paying too much attention. But for some reason, something felt odd about these specific lessons. Let's start with the first lesson. It's about tarot cards and arcanas. Now, we know these to be relevant themes within Persona games, especially after Persona 3, because if I'm not mistaken, Persona 1 and 2 did not feature the arcana mechanics that we have today. Through these lessons, you actually get to know what each card means and how they are interpreted. So you could easily pass this as the game trying to explain a newly introduced feature to the series, right? right? But it turns out that the second lecture that we get from the same professor actually expands on that notion a little bit in a way that I did not expect. In short, that second lesson is about Kabbalah. If I'm guessing right, you're probably looking at the screen right now and going, Ristel, what the heck is a Kabbalah? So Kabbalah is actually an esoteric school of thought that is part of Jewish mysticism. Now, the game gives you the very basic idea and premise as to what it represents, but I don't really fault it for not going deeper into the material because, as I've said in the intro, I actually went and visited the Kabbalah Center in Berlin to get more information, and I got out of there with 600 pages worth of books to read. Thankfully, not all of which is going to be relevant for this video or for this game, I suppose, but I did learn a lot from it. The game makes sure that the player is aware that these two concepts are related. By that I mean tarot and Kabbalah, as the professor will say that the 22 paths seen in Kabbalah are reflected into the number 22 of major arcanas in tarot deck. Now, where the game fails to provide enough information to the player is by lacking in visual. The core of Kabbalah and Kabbalistic thought are usually things that you would represent with an image. This specific image, in fact. This is the Tree of Life, the one that the professor refers to in his lesson. Each of the nodes that you see right there are called Sephiroth for singular and Sephiroth for plural. And no, it's not Sephiroth from Final Fantasy. No, just get that thought out of your head right now. As you can see on this picture of the Tree of Life, the different nodes are connected by links. This is where you would place the major arcanas if you were looking at it with the tarot mindset. The Tree of Life in Kabbalistic thought represents a journey that an individual must go through in order to reach enlightenment. Now you may think, okay, it's a tree, so I should look at the bottom and start from there. And you'd be wrong. I know that most religions usually represent enlightenment as reaching for the stars and going upwards, ascending towards something, but Kabbalah takes a different approach. Let's take a better look at the Tree of Life. First of all, the Sephiroth right there is called Malkut. Malkut you could translate into the word kingdom. At the very top we have Keter. That could be translated into the word crown. Now I want you to think about an actual tree and tell me what Malkut will represent. In short, if it is at the very bottom, it likely represents the roots. And what do trees need to grow? They need sunlight. Where do you get light? At the very top. If we apply the same idea, then Keter would be the leaves of the tree. Kabbalah revolves a lot around the concept of light and divine light. The idea is that light that comes from Keter needs to trickle all the way down into Malkut. Keter itself is not the creator of light, it merely receives it. And if any of the nodes under it fail to redirect the light, then Malkut will stay in the dark. And with that said, you should always look at the Tree of Life from the bottom to the top. Keep that in mind because this will be relevant later. And now for some reason, that actually sparked something in my head. Why do I remember this from somewhere? Why does this seem so familiar? And then it dawned on me. It was Devil May Cry 5, the Clifoth. I'm going to call it Clipot from now on. It's another pronunciation of the same word, but it's just much easier for me to say. So the Clipot. I mean, the Clipot in Devil May Cry 5 is a tree. It's evil though, and it kills people and serves to feed demons instead. And I don't know, I guess I made a connection with that and Tartarus being a tower, but I thought, hey, there's no shot that these concepts are actually related to the same religion, right? Oh, they are actually. So the Clipot is actually a corrupted or reversed version of the Tree of Life. Each Sephirah may turn into a Clipot if the light is not properly re-guided towards it. And if the whole tree turns into a Clipot, we call that the Tree of Death. Visually, it stays the same. It still has the same nodes, it still has the same pattern to it. It is just a mirrored version of the Tree of Life. Here's something that I found quite interesting when researching this though. As I already said, the idea of the Tree of Life is heavily tied to the concept of light. So what would be the inverse version of light? Darkness. Oh, isn't that strange? In a game that's all about the dark hour? Something else that kind of ties the idea of Clipots being part of this game, or at least having been considered when making the lore of this game, is the reversed Arcana cards. The game gives you one line at the very end of the summer classes about it and then just doesn't expand on it. But in short, in tarot, if a card appears in reverse, it means the opposite of what it is actually supposed to mean. And Clipots are exactly that. They are the reversed version of the Tree of Life. Something else worth pointing out here, we know that the number 22 is the number of major Arcana cards, but it's also the number of links within the Sephiroth. And what if I were to tell you that this number bears even more significance in Kabbalah? 22 is the number of letters contained within the Hebrew alphabet, and in Kabbalistic thought, 22 is the number of demons recognized by that practice. The concept of demons in Kabbalah is a bit different than the one we typically know in other religions. They're not entities, they are instead represented as challenges, things that someone must face before reaching true enlightenment. If you've ever tried to fight your own demons, then that's kind of what Kabbalistic thought is hinting at. When we look back at tarot and reversed arcana cards, these cards are challenges that someone must overcome. They are the reversed version of what that card would actually mean had it been drawn in its upside. So, the concept of Tree of Life is directly mentioned in this game. It also makes mention of the reversed arcana cards. And we also see something mirrored in this game, Tartarus. Because Tartarus in Greek mythology is actually meant to be an abyss. It's comparable to hell and its depictions in Christianity, but here in Persona 3, it's actually going upwards. It's a tower. Well, you might think that perhaps, oh, the devs simply picked the name Tartarus at random. They didn't really think about the Greek mythos at all. They just didn't want to use the word klipot or something like that. But you'd be wrong, because this game is constantly hitting back at Greek mythology. I won't go through every single persona that the main cast gets, but in short, Junpei has Hermes, Akihiko has Polydeuces. Yeah, that's a real word. Well, it's Pollux, but yeah. Obviously, Orpheus is also part of Greek mythology, and I guess a good example of all of that would be Cerberus just as well. The fact that the cast gets these personas, in my mind, definitely counteracts the idea that they did not know what they were doing by choosing the word Tartarus as their name. Everything is pointing back at Greek mythology, except with the fact that Tartarus is going upwards, hinting at it being an inverse version of the Tartarus in Greek mythology, so a klipot. Now, where am I going with all of this? Well, I actually have a couple theories to propose here. First things first, something very interesting about Kabbalah and about demons in Kabbalah. I already said that there were 22 of them, but I did not specify the fact that they are ranked by class. And would you look at that, there happens to be exactly 12 demon classes in Kabbalah. 12, the number 12, where have I heard this number before? Oh yeah, right, that's the number of major shadows we have to defeat in order to get rid of Tartarus. Once more, a number that matches. It's kind of weird how often that happens. Now yes, that doesn't answer every question that we may have, so let's talk about Tartarus specifically right now. We know that Tartarus was created because of the failed experiment, but what was the actual result of that experiment is the question. I can see two different ways of interpreting what happened. One way would be to say that it brought hell onto Earth. Like somehow this experiment managed to bring hell and Tartarus onto the same plane of existence as ours. Or my second theory, which I prefer, is that somehow this experiment may have empowered hell. It allowed it to grow into a tower, reaching for the stars, and to an extent perhaps reaching out for heaven. It already has corrupted our plane of existence. That can easily be shown through the cases of apathy syndrome. But I am adding the hypothetical that perhaps it is trying to even go further and corrupt heaven. Something else that is worth mentioning here is that Malkuth, the Sephira at the very bottom of the tree, is often described as our physical plane of existence. So perhaps in this case, Sis could be trying to go from Malkuth, which is where we live, and reach into Keter, perhaps trying to restore the light there. As I said before, Keter does not produce its own light, that still comes from the divine. And what if something were to obstruct that light? Kabbalistic thought always comes back to the idea of curtains, basically things that make us blind to the light and to its existence. So maybe something is obstructing the light and preventing it from reaching Keter. It could be something external to Tartarus or even Tartarus itself. Or, and this may sound like a stretch, but it's a possibility, the experiments were so bad that they actually shattered our connection to the divine, meaning that they sundered the light. And with that, I kind of ran out of theories to propose thus far. This is what I can make of based on where I'm at in the game. I acknowledge that this is not giving us all the information we need to understand the plot, but this is getting concrete. This is starting to look like something, and having a game push you out and go to a place just to buy books to read more about a religion you usually have never cared for, that is incredible. And I am very glad that I actually went out of the way and tried to learn more about Kabbalah. If you are interested in Kabbalah, perhaps someday I will release a video fully dedicated to it. But for now, I think we've basically gone over everything. I think now you can probably tell why I like this arc so much. My only complaint about it is that it's easy to miss. If I were to look at the footage of the summer classes on on my hard drive, these add up to about 3 minutes of gameplay, which I assume most players will probably skip over. But for the ones that do decide to read into it, there is so much to learn here. In fact, reading about Kabbalah has made me reconsider my opinions on some other characters from Persona 5. And while I wish I could just end this video on a kicker outro with all the explanations, I simply don't have them right now, and I guess that's fine. With that said, I wanted to thank my collaborator Jabari, who has been working with me and providing me with remixes of all the songs I've used for the theory part of this video. Working with him has been marvelous, and he's produced extremely good content for me to use, so I would highly recommend that you check him out. I would also like to thank the people at the Kabbalah Center in Berlin who were very kind and gave me the right directions to find the perfect book for me. And finally, of course, my biggest thanks goes out to you, the viewer. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. It was quite difficult to make, so if you did, please leave a like and subscribe. That really helps me out, and that shows me that yes, this whole entire ordeal was worth it. I genuinely hope that it was, because it was a lot of fun to do. Either way, I hope to see you into episode 5.